Hi, my name's Liz Scuff and welcome to this little exploration, collaborative, I get it wrong every time, collaborative learning for cultural repair. This video is part one in a 5-part series about inner criticism. Now, why is this relevant to cultural repair? Well, I'm not going to make a big list of it now. It's hugely relevant. The one thing I'll say to start with though is it's relevant because too much inner criticism it stops us being powerful. It stops us being able to follow our own sort of path, our own way in which we might make unique contributions in our cultures. And so that's one reason why it's important. There's a few more that I'll kind of say as we go on in the series. I also want to say that there's lots of different models used to describe experiences of inner criticism. Even within like Western European Anglo culture, there's lots of different models in different kinds of ways of thinking about psychology and psychotherapy in different philosophies. And then of course in other cultures, some cultures won't even have constructs similar to inner criticism. Might not be the way they think about or talk about their lived experience at all. So this is not culturally like transferable. It's not a universal truth about humans. It's a synthesis of like the process-oriented psychology approach, which is the one that I mostly use in my work. And that itself is a synthesis of many approaches across a few cultures. And most approaches are, most psychotherapeutic or psychodynamic approaches are synthesis approaches. It's also based on my clinical experience as a depth psychotherapist, it's hard to say, working with clients for about 10 years now, frequently on inner criticism actually. And then also my own lived experience as a therapy client, also more or less working on inner criticism for 20 years as well. So if this resonates with you, that's great. It means it's a good fit model to describe your experience. If it doesn't resonate for you, that's great too. It just means this is not the right model to describe your experience. So keep hunting. Don't try and make yourself fit this model. So, have a listen for a little bit, and if you're just like, doesn't resonate, then don't keep watching. Okay, so step one in this, part one in the series is about becoming aware of just becoming aware of inner criticism. And I'm not sure if this first step is the toughest, but it is a bit tough. So it can be a weird mix of sort of enlightening and relieving and sad, because we're often finding out how much we're suffering from way more inner criticism than we realised, and we become aware of all the ways, or all probably just many and some significant ways in which inner criticism has held us back and meant sort of lost opportunities in our lives. So this is grief, and it's really normal. So if that kind of comes up when you listen to this, that's perfectly to be expected. It's not a great sales pitch for watching the rest of the video, I know, but the good news is this part doesn't actually have to last all that long necessarily, because noticing suffering, most of the time it's actually less painful than ignoring it. I know it's a bit of a weird thing to say, but I do think that's more often than not that's the case. So take your time with the video. Maybe pause every now and again and feel any feelings that might be happening. Take a few notes if you want to, squeeze something squishy or whatever makes you feel good. I'll try and remember to invite moments of pause, but I don't strictly script these that kind of directly, so I might forget. So yeah, maybe take a few pauses if you feel you need to, or watch it another day if you're like, maybe it's not the right day. Anyway, I'm going to say more about inner criticism as a psychic structure over this series of videos, but I at least want to mention here that inner criticism is frequently, but not only, also a form of internalized oppression. Internalized oppression, when we're talking about that, we're often talking about inner criticism as well. And this is the way in which our psyche, like our inner world, replicates the cultural messages of oppression and marginality that maybe we experienced in our family of origin growing up, or the wider society we grew up in. So the patterns of inner criticism, the sort of the core inner criticisms we experience, they're usually patterned in our growing up. And that's also partly why we come to sort of not notice them so much, because they've just become so normalized in our identity. So in this first video, we're looking at the ways in which inner criticism can manifest. So that's like how we're experiencing it. It's not a definitive list, but it's a good foundation. Certainly probably uncover a few new ways in which it might be happening for you. So first thing to kind of, before I get into the list, is to understand what a communication exchange involves. So inner criticism is a communication exchange, which tells us a few things. First, it tells us that there are two parts of self involved. Right? So imagine your inner world is it's a group actually of lots of different selves. So there is a sender, a critical figure, we can call them the inner critic, right? Call them whatever you like, and a receiver, which is like the victim of the critic, the one who is getting criticised and hurt by someone saying critical, hurtful things, or not just saying. We'll get into that. Secondly, a communication exchange means that communication is happening in channels of communication. So communication happens in particular ways, which we can call channels of communication. That's actually what I'm going to mostly explore in the rest of the video. The third thing about communication exchanges is understanding that they involve intended messages and unintended messages, but there is an intention in the message. The fourth is communication exchanges. Communication is done in particular styles. Like right now, I have a particular style of communicating on the video. I don't know what we'd label it, but it's a style, right? So the style of communication influences or dictates the nature of relationship between parts or different roles in a communication exchange. So the style matters too. Now, I've mentioned it before, but because for most people, inner criticism has been a significant part of their internal environment for a long time, it's become the norm, and therefore many of the communication exchanges, they slip under the radar of awareness. We don't even clock that we're experiencing inner criticism. So understanding the channels in which criticism can happen, like the communication channels, can help us become more aware of it. And in the model that I use, there's 6 main channels. So let's dive into those. First one is auditory, an auditory channel of communication. And so a lot of people experience inner criticism as something they kind of hear internally. It's like a running commentary in our heads telling us we did something stupid, or we're being lazy, or we're too slow, we're not motivated enough, I should be doing this, I shouldn't be doing that, etc., etc. And this can be called an auditory experience of inner criticism because we're hearing critical commentary, like there's words being said internally. We're not necessarily hearing it like a sound, but we're having an experience of internal hearing and internal conversation. We can also call it an auditory experience when we say critical things about ourselves out loud. If I said, "Oh my God, I'm just so stupid," or "That was so stupid. What was I thinking? I'd lose my head if it wasn't screwed on." That kind of thing, it's an inner criticism in an auditory channel. Self-deprecating humour and sarcastic comments towards ourselves can also be auditory experiences of inner criticism. So that's the first one, auditory. Second is visual. So inner criticism can be a visual experience in a range of different ways. So like in our nighttime dreams, if our dreams are including critical figures or symbols, because dreams are really largely visual experiences. Criticism triggered by seeing ourselves in a mirror, or in a photo, or feeling really uncomfortable being filmed or photographed can sometimes be about visual inner criticism. And being critical about how we look is also in part a visual experience of inner criticism. Right, like it's coming out in that kind of visual way. Third one is movement. This is a really interesting one. So sometimes the way we move our body can indicate a critical dynamic is happening. So being really hurried or rushed to get somewhere, that could be, not always, right, but that can be actually inner criticism. You're getting pressured internally. Like little whacks on the forehead. Oh my God, like impatient drumming of the fingers. They might all be signals of inner criticism happening in movement channel. Also, things like aggressive or dangerous driving, small accidents like stubbing your toe, knocking your elbow, and sometimes some postural stances like slumping shoulders, or maybe they could also be inner criticism being experienced in movement. And so you might already be thinking, I'm going to catch you if you are, wondering about more intense forms of self-harm or self-harming behaviours, and I'm actually not going to go there in this video. I think they're really complex and they need more time, and because I don't think they can just be explained as acts of inner criticism, so I'm parking that topic. Sorry. Okay, next channel. In process, what you call it proprioceptive, could be called somatic as well, but it's when inner criticism is experienced through feelings in the body. And it could be anything, really almost, but like commonly it's like feeling like gravity has kind of been dialed up, like you just feel like really heavy, migraines, headaches, tight throat, shallow breathing. They could all be signals of inner criticism. Certain food cravings, I think, also fit in this channel of proprioceptive experiences that can indicate in a critical internal state, especially cravings for sugar and processed carbohydrates. And also many addictions and addictive tendencies are also partly, not only, but partly attempts to get a break from inner criticism. Like we use these substances because often we just feel like some peace and like we're not being harassed and pressured internally. And so those desires and compulsions and cravings can also be a signal that we're experiencing like internal criticism. Okay, so the fifth one, it's a bit different. We call it a relationship channel because, this is a very common way of experiencing inner criticism is actually by projecting it onto others. And when we project our own inner critic onto other people, we call it relationship channel, and that's when we fantasize that they are thinking negatively of us, and or a particular character trait or a behavior that they're critical of it. And it can be quite common in both parties in relationships, intimate relationships particularly, to project inner critics onto each other, and they're mostly in relationship with each other's critics, not like the rest of the person. And both people can feel like they're being harassed or criticised by the other. And this can make us kind of erroneously interpret what others are saying or do as being critical of us. And like an example of this is if I was critical towards myself about being messy around the house, let's say, for example, actually I'm not that messy, I used to be. But when we just say I saw my partner tidying up, right, if I was projecting my inner critic, I could be thinking that their tidying up is actually a criticism of me. But generally, they're probably actually just tidying up because they like to tidy up. But when I project that critic, it's like I think they're doing something critical of me that I'm critical about myself of. And another way in which we project our inner critics is just by being critical of other people. So being very critical and judgmental of others, it's usually just a sign of your own inner criticism, right? It's just getting expressed in a relationship channel. Not always, like sometimes things that people are doing actually really impact us and needs to be addressed. And that's a little different to criticism though. Being impacted by something is different to being critical of it. Okay, the sixth channel. It's a little bit the same as the relationship channel. It's about projecting inner critics, but this is about projecting inner criticism into the world. We call it a world channel. It's when we project it onto people we don't know, into institutions, to objects, and maybe to transpersonal spiritual entities or concepts, right? So it can be like feeling uncomfortable in groups, like groups you don't know, or being self-conscious when you walk into a restaurant full of people, or people you don't know, right? But you walk in feeling like people are judging your outfit or something. Or if you get really overwhelmed, terrified at the idea of public speaking. This could also be like projected inner criticism. That really happens. You get in front of a group of people and you're like looking for the person who's going to criticize you, and you're expecting and waiting for criticism. Doesn't mean that's not true. There's always a leadership challenge in groups, but I'm going off track. But it's also projection. So another way in which we might do that, which we'd call world channel, is when we think that the world is against us, or that we've got bad karma kind of thing, or when we anthropomorphize inanimate objects and think that they're against us. And it's like those moments when the stupid evil stapler that won't staple the pages properly is just trying to make my life hell. I said that's a projected inner critic in the world channel kind of thing. So that's world channel. That's the sixth one. That was a lot really quickly. I forgot to invite you to pause. I'm so sorry. Have a pause now if you want, if you didn't already. And just, yeah, catch your breath. I should catch my breath. Take a moment. Just check in with your feelings. I'm actually really close to the end of the video. It's a lot, right? And so you might want to listen back again, grab a pen and paper. Maybe I should have suggested that at the start. But you know, it's a video. You can watch it as many times as you like. The last thing I want to say about this, though, when we're thinking about channels and ways in which inner criticism happens, it usually or frequently happens in multiple channels at the same time. So, for example, if we like slap our hand on our forehead and say, oh, that was stupid, what was I thinking? Auditory and movement. There's the movement and the statement is auditory. Or having really shaky hands or shaking in your body before or during a public presentation, we might say there's shaking and it's about a world channel thing, so it's movement and it's world. So they often kind of turn up together, and that can sometimes make it a little more confusing to sort of try to work out what's going on. Anyway, that's the first video in the series. There is going to be more, and I am going to be talking about what can you do about it as well. I'm going to be talking about different kinds of critics, what their purpose is, when and how they can be useful, and techniques for kind of working with your own inner critics, and also how to know when you shouldn't work on it on your own, when you really got to go get help, because it won't be safe to work on it on your own. So that's coming up in the rest of the series. I'm not exactly sure which one when, but yeah, I hope this was useful and not too overwhelming. Love to read your thoughts in the comments, as always, and I will catch you in the next video, hopefully. Okay, thanks. Bye.